Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about 3D wargames and the complexities of aerial warfare. So I recently played an aerial warfare game and it got me thinking about the challenges of creating a table rule system that can cope with three-dimensional warfare without becoming slow and unwieldy. Aerial combat presents a set of unique challenges due to the complexity of movement, engagement and environmental factors in a 3D space. So this week I thought I would discuss a few rule systems, some of which I've played, others I've only read about, to see how they address this particular issue. Now this is understandably by no means an exhaustive list, but it is a brief attempt to appreciate the unique challenges of moving wargames from a flat surface into a three-dimensional battleground. So some rules try to make the complexity of aerial combat simpler by using hex-based systems of movement. Games like Ace's High, Check Your Six, represent horizontal movement by dividing the battlefield into a grid or hex, with altitude represented as an additional dimension. Now aircraft then move across the grid in horizontal directions, and altitude is tracked using numbers or markers. Now climbing or descending costs movement points, and altitude differences can affect combat outcomes. And in order to keep the game simpler to administer and quicker to play, speed and momentum have been simplified somewhat. So aircraft move a certain number of hexes based on their speed, and turns or climbs are limited to prevent unrealistic movement. Now combat happens when planes come within a certain range, with altitude sometimes providing bonuses or penalties just as it would in the real world. Now the benefit of such a system is that they are easy to grasp, making them great for newcomers to wargaming or old farts like me whose brain power is on the wane. But by keeping altitude and movement relatively simple, these games prioritise fast, accessible gameplay, but it does require making compromises with realism, which some wargamers may not enjoy. And then there are template-based systems. I'm thinking of games like X-Wing or Wings of Glory, which use movement templates to manage the chaos of aerial dogfights. Now these templates allow players to visually track manoeuvres like sharp turns, dives or rolls without cluttering the game mat with a visual grid or hexes. Some players don't want to see a hex or a grid laid out across their nice cloudscape. And while movement is handled on a 2D plane, altitude is represented by dials or counters that indicate whether an aircraft is at high, medium or low altitude. And speed is directly tied to movement templates, so faster planes can execute longer or more complex manoeuvres, while slower aircraft are maybe more restricted. And combat is resolved using range bands with altitude adjustments affecting hit chances or firing arcs. And these systems have been incredibly popular because they offer visual clarity and can be easy to pick up. Players can see the movement without positioning of their aircraft, without needing to track complex variables, and makes the gameplay faster and much more intuitive. However, once again, compromises with complexity mean that altitude and 3D positioning are somewhat simplified, and that's not to everyone's taste. Then we have what could probably be best described as vector-based systems. Games like Air Superiority and Birds of Prey, which I hasten to add I've not played, but I have read about. I've read some of the rules. These try to incorporate the physics of flying in a way that other systems try and avoid. These games track every aspect of an aircraft's movement, heading, speed, altitude, even momentum. And instead of moving along a fixed grid, players can use vectors to represent the direction and speed of their game, allowing for realistic climbing, diving and turning manoeuvres. Now, if you're looking for a deep simulation, then vector-based systems are as close as you can get to real-world dogfighting. They offer players total control over their aircraft's movement and positioning, making them ideal for enthusiasts who enjoy that high levels of tactical depth. But for every happy nerd indulging in detail, there will always be at least one other wargamer for whom the complexity is the main downside. Tracking vectors, momentum and altitude requires a lot of bookkeeping, which slows down gameplay and arguably detracts from the fast-paced action typical associated with dogfights. There are dozens, probably hundreds of different air combat rules, and I can only touch on a handful really here. Wargames that depict 3D aerial combat vary enormously in how they handle the challenge of movement, speed and altitude. Now whether you prefer fast-paced dogfights with simplified rules or detailed simulations that dive deep into physics, there's a system out there for every type of gamer. Which leads neatly to my question to you. What are your favourite aerial combat wargame systems and why are they your favourites? I'll include space combat in here as well as historical or air combat systems, although I appreciate the physics for these would be completely different, but just for the sake of simplicity for today's discussion I'll include those as well. Now nonetheless, many of the complexities for wargamers remain similar, and I would love to hear which systems you think tackle the challenge the best. So in keeping with this week's topic, my hobby update includes an aerial combat game that the Rejects played last weekend. Richard has written yet another excellent set of rules, this time for aerial combat in World War II. I vaguely recall him saying that this is a set of rules that he's been working on for years. It's been on his drawing board for many years, and it's only really come together recently. He's done a cracking job of it. And we played a test game via Zoom several months ago, but now he wanted to bring it to the Shed of War so that we could play it in person. So on Sunday we had two linked games that involved dogfights between the Luftwaffe and the RAF somewhere over the English Channel in sight of the White Cliffs. Now, as one of the German players, I'm pleased to say that the Luftwaffe came out on top by the end of the day. The first game was a simple meeting engagement with a squadron of 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s versus 3 Spitfires, and all the aircraft started the game having spotted each other and then proceeded to jockey each other for position before sweeping in. And I spent most of the game going way too fast and finding that I didn't have the manoeuvrability that would enable me to take advantage of situations that arose during the combat. So during the second game, after lunch, I kept my speed a little bit lower, but it enabled me to do a lot more in terms of manoeuvrability, which not only saved my bacon but also enabled me to bag a kill that would have been impossible if I'd been going faster. So that second game introduced elements that weren't present during the first, namely spotting of the enemy, use of blinds to represent aircraft that you haven't spotted yet, and the presence of terrain in the form of clouds over at various different altitudes. Now all players started with 2 blinds, one of which would be the real aircraft, but only they would know which, and the enemy planes would then have to make an attempt to spot by picking an aircraft and passing a dice test. And although it didn't take too long for both sides to identify all the enemy aircraft, it did add an interesting element to the game. Later on, when new aircraft entered the fray, for instance, they came in outside of the field of view of a certain aircraft, so they couldn't be spotted. So it was an interesting element to throw into the game. The clouds in particular created an interesting element to the game, particularly when I found my backside tailed by a tenacious Spitfire. Machine gun bullets were whizzing past the canopy of my aircraft and through the tail, but I only by luck and poor dice rolling on a part of my opponent saved my skin. I had a chance to escape by diving down into cloud, which was exactly what would have happened in real combat. More importantly for me, that when I exited the cloud, I was able to use my slower speed and greater manoeuvrability to quickly get behind my previous attacker and blow him out the sky with a well-aimed shot into his fuel tank. I didn't get long to gloat over my victory, however, because another enemy Spitfire almost immediately got the bounce on me, putting several bullets through my fuel tank and sending my plane spiralling towards the channel in flames. After having spent most of the day playing cat and mouse, this was an extremely exciting 30 minutes towards the end of the day and made the game a really enjoyable experience. And once again, clever Richard has created himself a really good set of rules that I think we'll be playing again and again over the next few years. Now I'm sticking with the theme of aerial combat for this week's book review. Spitfire Voices, Life as a Spitfire Pilot in the Words of the Veterans by Dilip Sarkar is a compelling and moving collection of first-hand accounts from pilots who flew the legendary Supermarine Spitfire during World War II. Now this book was first published in 2010 and I think I read it shortly after that. I had it quite a while. So when I picked today's talking point combined with Richard's game, I knew that I had to write a quick review of this book to end on. Now the book captures the experiences of those veterans, offering a really powerful insight into their thoughts and emotions and experiences both in the cockpit and on the ground. Sakar is a well-known historian and author specialising in the Battle of Britain and has crafted a narrative that honours the bravery and sacrifice of these men. The collection of reminiscences and interviews also shed light on the psychological and physical challenges that these really young pilots faced during one of the most dangerous periods in aviation history. Now, as you would expect, the book relies heavily on primary sources such as interviews and personal testimonies from pilots who flew the Spitfire in various theatres of war. Now, the book is not a dry recounting of historical facts, but rather an intimate collection of memories that provide a deeply human perspective of the war. Through these interviews, Sakar weaves a tapestry of different experiences from the Battle of Britain to the air campaigns over Europe, North Africa and the Far East. The result is a mosaic of personal stories that give readers an authentic and varied sense of what it was like to fly a Spitfire in combat. Now, the book vividly captures the emotional and psychological toll of warfare on these pilots. While many of the veterans Sakar interviewed recall the adrenaline and the thrill of flying such a powerful and responsive aircraft, they also reflect on the fear, the uncertainty and the loss that accompanied their missions. Some of the pilots recount near-death experiences, while others speak of the heartbreak of losing friends and comrades in battle. These personal reflections add a level of depth and poignancy to the book, making it more than just a celebration of the Spitfire as a machine of war. This book is a tribute to the human spirit that enabled these incredible aircraft to become such an iconic and important weapon. And one of the things I most liked about Sakar's writing style is the fact that it's very accessible and very engaging. The author acts as a guide, providing context and background for each pilot's story without overshadowing their voices with his own. It is clear that he has a deep knowledge of the subject matter, which only enhances the reading experience as he skillfully places each account within the broader historical framework of World War II air combat. This book is also filled with loads of photographs, many of which are rare or previously unpublished, giving readers a visual connection to the pilots and the planes being discussed. And this adds an additional layer of authenticity that brings the narratives, really does bring them to life. It has to be said though that Spitfire Voices is less about the intricacies of air tactics and more about the personal stories behind the pilots. Now, while this approach makes it accessible to a broader audience, those seeking a detailed military analysis may find this aspect a little bit lacking. However, as someone who thinks our understanding and appreciation of history comes from the stories, not from the technical specifications of war, I think this isn't such a bad thing. Now, overall, Spitfire Voices is a deeply moving tribute to the men who flew the Spitfire and the experiences they lived through during World War II. Dilip Sakar has done an excellent job, in my opinion, of preserving their voices for future generations, and his book is a must-read for anyone interested in aviation history, World War II, or their personal accounts of combat. Through the veteran stories, Sakar successfully captures both the excitement and the tragedy of air warfare, making this a significant and heartfelt read that I heartily recommend. So that's it for this week. As always, please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and of course click on the community tab if you want to keep up to date with anything I post in between these videos. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content in general, please tap on the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming and of course keep rolling high.